Welcome to Engineering Peak Performance, a user manual. This is a brief primer on the state of flow. Before I get into the state of flow, here's a brief reading list for you. I highly recommend every single book on this list. So one of the areas that I've been studying for over 35 years now are under what conditions do you perform at your best? And I want you to think about that for yourself. And here's an example from a session. And you can see there are various things, various answers. And what's interesting about this is you notice near the top in the middle, you see pressure. For some people, pressure brings out their best, and for other people, no pressure brings out their best. So conditions that bring out your best are very person specific. Now, at the beginning of COVID, there was an HBR article entitled "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief." And then Adam Grant wrote an article in 2021 entitled "There's a Name for the Blah You're Feeling. It's called languishing." And languishing is basically carrying out tasks in an aimless and joyless manner. If you haven't experienced languishing yourself, you've surely worked with someone who's experiencing languishing. And in the article, Adam Grant points to the state of flow and says an antidote to languishing is flow. And he actually said that during the early days of the pandemic, the best predictor of well-being wasn't optimism or mindfulness, it was actually flow. People who were more immersed in their projects managed to avoid languishing and maintain their pre-pandemic happiness. So what exactly is flow? In its very simplest terms, flow is when you feel your best and you perform your best. So it's a state of optimal experience with spikes of peak performance. And if you're wondering what the most frequently flow-inducing activity is in the world, it's actually reading. So basically, your performance is strongly correlated to the state you're in. And traditionally, medicine and psychology is focused on compromised performance due to compromised state, such as mental illness, injury. It was only about 50 or 60 years ago that sports psychologists started looking at the other side of the coin in terms of peak performance. And if you take surfing as an example, surfing is a 1,000-year-old sport. The largest wave ever surfed up to the mid-90s was about 25 feet. Here is Rodrigo Coxa surfing an 82-foot wave. I had to update this presentation because a fellow by the name of Sebastian Stutner surfed a 115-foot wave in 2021. That's 33 feet more than Rodrigo surfed. Remember, the record in the mid-90s was only 25 feet. So according to Steven Kotler, author of Rise of Superman and the Art of Impossible, he argues that if you're in a situation where the consequences are so high that your life might actually be in danger and you have no choice but to be in flow, if you're able to get into flow in those conditions, then your performance is significantly boosted. And flow is that state that any of us have access to. McKinsey asked 5,000 executives over the course of a decade, when you and your team are in the state of flow, how much more productive would you say you are? And the most frequent answer they received was an increase of 5 times. Jimmy Johnson won the 1993 Super Bowl and actually held up this book during an interview and said, "We won because of this book." And then all of a sudden, Eastern European researcher by the name of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi became famous overnight. Now, this isn't a new state. It's been talked about for thousands of years. And basically what's happening is when you're in a state of flow, several pleasurable and performance-enhancing neurochemicals start to flood the system. And as a result, learning goes up, creativity goes up, physical strength goes up, a whole bunch of different performance attributes go up. So what are the characteristics of flow? First of all, you're absorbed in the task at hand. You're engaged in the use of your talents. That inner critic and worry, the itty-bitty shitty committee, quiets down. You lose complete track of time. For some people, it speeds up. For other people, it slows down. And you do something just for the sake of doing it. It's called autotelic. Love for the sake of doing. 3 preconditions for flow: a clear goal, a slightly stretched challenge, And feedback is inherent in the task. You know how you're doing as you're doing it. So, as you think about how to get yourself into the state of flow, if you're looking at your talent insight matrix, the first column shows your talents, a brief description, and the family that they come from. There's 34 talents that come from 4 families: strategic thinking, executing, influencing, and relationship building. And then at the top, you see I've laid out the talents in this format of what you need, what you like or don't like, what you do, and what that results in. So I've kind of aligned them around what's called the flow loop, which I'll talk about later. Each one of these, you should view these as each one of these is a cell that you can use to enter into the state of flow. And then the last column shows that talent in terms of a metaphor and in terms of a barrier label. A barrier label is someone who might view that talent, might not work with you often, and they'll interpret that talent from its shadow side. So something else we'll talk about a little later is called bad flow, but you should be aware of how you could be perceived based on your talents. So as you're thinking about this, the first exercise to do is to derive your spheres of peak performance. And if you go through the I need and I like and metaphor of each talent, you'll start to have an idea of what that sphere of peak performance could look like. It's kind of that state you enter based on that particular talent that starts to activate flow for you. And once you become familiar with your spheres of peak performance, then we can start creating techniques to get ourselves into flow much faster.